What's up, guys? It's Apurva. I'm so excited to have another episode of the Door Stories podcast. I got my good friend Rickey Biddle. I can't wait to unpack his story. He's going to introduce himself in just a second here. We are talking about development. We're talking about long-term buy and hold, but we're talking at a big scale. We're not talking about single family anymore. So I'm excited to kind of talk about your journey. Rickey, what's up, brother? How have you been?
What's up, Apurva? Thanks for having me on here. I'm excited to do this with you.
For sure. So I'm just going to dive right in. I know a little bit about your journey, but let's unpack it. Like, where did it start professionally? Where did you get exposed to real estate? Kind of what dragged you into the business? And then we'll kind of talk about where you're at today.
Sure, yeah. So I didn't start in real estate. I didn't start my professional career in real estate. I started in hospitality. I opened a restaurant bar when I was pretty young. Um, and I was operating that for a period of time until I realized that in the restaurant industry, it's really incredibly difficult, challenging. It's a tough industry to operate in. And I looked at it and I said, there's two ways to go about this. Either you just absolutely love the restaurant industry, you just want to work in it day in, day out, or you have to scale it. And neither one of them I wanted to do. And my dad had some real estate. I feel like that could be a good pivot for me. I was in my mid 20s, and I got exposed to some developers in Philadelphia, and I started to look at real estate versus hospitality, and thought that I would have a good long-term trajectory doing real estate. So I got into my first couple of deals in Philadelphia through some buddies I had up there, and I kind of just scaled up from there. But that was my entrance into real estate.
So unpack that for a second. What kind of deals were they? Were they like small single family stuff? What was your parents doing? I want to kind of connect the dots a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So my dad, growing up, he just had a couple of single family rentals, and I would go, every time somebody moved out, I would help him do the turnover and clean it up and all that. So I always thought it was fun. When you do it at such a large scale, it's not fun anymore. It was fun
Right.
doing the turnovers when it's like 1 and 2 and you're hanging out and working with your dad. Um, but so I'd always been exposed to real estate growing up. And I guess the precipice was I went to a couple conferences and started to learn a little bit more about the potential that real estate had. My very first deal was a development deal. So I don't know if it was smart or just completely ignorance is bliss, but I just do. I did. I did two developments simultaneously while also running my restaurant. They were ground up new construction. I bought a couple pieces of land with some money that I had scraped together, and built two duplexes in Philadelphia. I have some stories for that, but um, you know, they, they they were successful in the end when I finally got them developed. And I said, this is great. This worked. My plan worked, and I did a couple more and a couple more. And, next thing I know, I'm doing a couple year, and then it turned into bigger and bigger and bigger. And, I can certainly talk about that journey, but that was where everything started.
Dude, talk about diving in head first. I mean, as you know now, as an expert, like, new construction ground up is not for the faint of heart, right? So like, crazily impressive, and I think maybe it's that 20-year-old energy of like, I'm just gonna dive in and just figure this out. Um, a couple quick questions, like, so how on earth did you even know what to do, right? Because there's so much complexity to ground up. There's so many moving parts. And was this building in Pennsylvania, if I'm not mistaken, where you grew up, or where were you building?
Yeah, this was in Philadelphia. It was actually student housing on Temple University's campus. Um, and again, like it's like ignorance is bliss. You just when you're in that mindset, I guess maybe mid-20s, you just think you can conquer anything. Most people probably start with like a fix or flip or something, and I just
Right.
went completely head first. And it was I'll tell you what, it was challenging. It was really, really difficult because I don't think that I pre-planned enough. I didn't really understand the gravity and complexity of new construction, even on a small scale like that, even doing a duplex. But We assembled a team, got some architects together, found a builder or two to help us build. Somehow, I have no idea how we got a bank loan to help us develop this, because obviously couldn't develop it with cash on our own, but got through it somehow, got them all rented, and went in and refinanced it, pulled some of our capital back out, and took it on, and just repeated that process for a period of time.
So that kind of jump started you. You just kind of started getting into action. Like you mentioned, started with a couple and then just rinse and repeat, and obviously getting better and hopefully more kind of effective each step, each turn you've taken. Walk me through kind of, I think you shifted gears into student housing and then beyond now, but like tell me kind of what that kind of segue turn, how did that happen?
Well, so for a period of time, really what we're doing is duplex and triplex and quadplex, just doing some small deals, and after we got good at it, it was fairly simple. We're doing a very similar model each project. We put our own twist on each one and made process improvements and made design improvements along the way. But it was a beautiful model, because what we did is you would get a construction loan basically for the construction. And by the time that we're done the project, after all design and entitlements, it was up and built. We leased it. During this period over the last decade, as there's just like the real estate market was so hot. Cap rates got so compressed that from the time that we started to the time that we were done, we built so much value along that process, partially due to us building the value, but also because of the market in general. So by the time that we were done, we were able to refinance the construction loan, pull out the construction loan, pull out our capital, maybe even a little bit more. We took that capital and redeployed it into the next project. Sometimes it was even more than what our total project was, just because the value increased that much. And we continued to refill the pie. As we're refilling the pot, we're redeploying it every year. And we would go from maybe 2 a year to 3 a year to 4 a year. And then once you hit year 5, usually these construction loans are around 5-year terms. At year 5, we're now refinancing the first set of projects, pulling out additional capital. And now we're ramping it up to doing 4, 5, or 6 a year. And it just kind of escalated over time.
I love that. I mean, a testament to your maturity at a young age. Most of us, myself included, we start getting a windfall of capital. That money's spent before it's even hit the bank. But that's impressive. You kind of had the foresight to be like, hey, let's just keep rolling the wins, roll the wins. Let's build, build, build. And most people kind of sell to liquidate, but you were able to, because you created so much value, refinance and hold, right? And just kind of amass a larger portfolio, but still get some chips off the table, which is, that's the perfect storm. Sometimes you need kind of all the pieces to line up. And in a good market, that oftentimes can be achieved, right? We're obviously in a bit more of a shaky market. Let's fast forward a little bit. So you were building kind of the small multifamily for a while, and now we leveled up somewhere, right? So now we're doing, some pretty big multifamily at this point, mostly around student housing. Tell me kind of what's the latest and greatest what we're doing now.
Yeah, so I'll give you like a little segue into the history. So we were doing the 2s, 3s, the 4s, then we did an 8 or a 10, something like that, and then we did maybe a 15 unit. The last project we probably did in Temple was one of our biggest, and we did 32 units of a commercial. And this was one where we kind of got outside of our box a little bit. It was right on Broad Street, right on Main and Main. It was our biggest project. And in this project, I learned a lot, because it was totally different. It was a totally different model from doing a small 2 and 3 and even a 10 unit building. When you're starting to move up in terms of the unit count, the height, the different material types, there's added complexity to it. But then from a financial standpoint, it changes a little bit too. A lot of times when you have the smaller projects, you're selling or evaluating them on comps. Maybe there's a little bit of a cap rate component to it, but it's kind of like a duplex over here sold for X a unit or X for the whole project. A duplex that we just developed is going to be very similar. As you get bigger, you're working off a NOI. So I realized that your net operating income is incredibly important, and the multiplier on those incremental increases are just so dramatically different. So if you're able to push NOI, the valuation of the property just goes that much more. So what I did is we had this commercial component to it, and we were able to negotiate a really, really favorable lease. And we're probably, $5 or $6 over market. And I realized that $5 or $6, even though, or I guess on an annual basis, the cash flow it does have some impact to it, but the multiplier on that, when you take that and put it right to the bottom line on the NOI and you would assign a cap rate to it, it just multiplies the value of the property so much more. And I was like, oh my gosh, wow, this is really cool. So like as we're pushing rents in both the residential and the commercial side, it's dramatically increasing the value of this project, of
Yeah, I
this
love
property.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to unpack that a little bit. So basically, what your bottom line is, you're saying, as I increase my cash flow from the property, we were coming off a market that were probably like 20, 22 times value is created for every basically dollar that is going to the bottom line annually, right? And so maybe we're 15, 18 times, which is still insane if you think about kind of, overall what that means. So like that's why we're pushing as much revenue, after expenses to the bottom line as possible, right? And so that could be rent rates, it could be some, other new additional add-ons to the kind of offering that you have, that juices the return on the annual or revenue on an annual basis, right? That's kind of that's the game, right? Is basically what we're all trying to play here. But you had the foresight to say, hey, like if I can just keep pushing more dollar to the bottom line for this property, my top line value is going higher and higher. And then you've got a lot of flexibility of how you unlock that, whether it's refinancing or selling or whatever the case may be, to use that to juice into other deals and move into a bigger asset, right? Effectively is kind of what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So good.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say one thing on that. Up until that point, I really had looked at these properties as just mechanism for cash flow. I didn't really understand the way that value can be impacted. And until I did this first, call it like larger property. And we ended up selling this property. We don't really sell very many properties, but probably 5 or 10 even through my whole career out of the 100+ projects that we've done. But this particular property we sold, and it just hit me. It sounds like such a novel concept, but it just hit me that as I'm pushing this NOI, and we did such a phenomenal job on this project that NOI, we outperformed what our projection was. And the value of the project just, it blew me away because it was higher than the appraisal, it was higher than our pro forma, and we ended up selling it. It was an incredible windfall for us that we then took, and that's kind of what spurred that next level up of our development career.
And so let's talk about kind of the business, right? So like you started kind of doing onesie twosie as it sounds like a small partnership. You're pretty lean still as it is, which I think there's pluses and minuses to staying lean, and I'm more in the staying lean camp these days as the better model, right? As opposed to a big, massive organization. But what does the makeup look like? Where did you guys decide like, hey, we're kind of like a running business? Like when did that kind of those tipping points start to hit? And then like how do you divide roles, in a small partnership? Like, how does that work? Like, what's your world? What's your partner's world? Or partners, if you have more than one? Walk me through that a little bit.
Yeah, so I actually started, so we were doing development. At one point I looked into the whole pipeline, right? When you do a ground up new construction, there's so many pieces along the way, and everybody's making a little bit of money. You have the broker, and you have the title company, and you have the general contractor, the property manager. And I looked at it and I said, oh man, why don't we try to vertically integrate and do it all? And so at one point I was doing some general contracting on the projects. I was the property manager. I was trying to have a little piece of each. And I realized that that is so incredibly difficult. And it was almost arrogant of me to think that I could do as good a job in each one of those buckets as a professional could do. So what ended up happening is I formed a property management company. Uh, my part still in some ways vertically integrated because we're doing the development, pre-development, entitlements, all that stuff together. His company is building it. My company was managing it. I grew my property management to, we're managing around 1,500 tenants, probably 30 employees, something like that. But it got to be so cumbersome. I was using my property management as a resource for development, and it got really convoluted, who was doing what. So I ended up
Mm.
spinning my property management company off in 2021. So I sold that and focused my efforts on just development. So I have just a development company. We don't do anything else besides development. And that laser focus has allowed us to concentrate on what our skills are, what our core competency is. And also, like you said, it keeps us really lean. We have a small organization, but we rely on consultants, we rely on contractors, we rely on our partnerships, because we're really just doing one piece of the puzzle. When we were trying to do too much, it got really difficult, really complicated. I think as you become an expert in whatever you're doing, you could probably add on. So if I did it in reverse and we were a developer and then I added a property management component later on, once we had the development dialed in, I think we would have been more successful. Not the property management company was very successful. It took so much of my time and efforts away, and it got me distracted from what we really were as developers and what our core competency was, and as well as where most of the profitability is.
And so, what is the makeup of y'all's organization today? How many people? I think it's three, 4 people represent the whole company, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so I have my partner and I, and then we have a director of finance and acquisition, and then we have an analyst, and that's the whole company right now, and it's
Oh, that's
wonderful.
awesome.
It's great. I used to think, I just want this big organization, and the more layers of management, the better, and it's going to be easier to manage. But man, processes are easy to manage. People are tough.
Oh, I love that, dude. That's a tagline that needs to go on a shirt, right? So I love that, and it completely concur, right? I mean, we're probably similar timeline in business, right? And there's just kind of this trajectory of like, probably a defeating return on effort, right, over time. That like, hey, just kind of managing people and things like that. Nothing wrong with it. There's great organizations that do it really well, but everybody's got to kind of figure out their sweet spot of where they want to concentrate their skills, right? So I love that. So ultra lean, I mean, 4 people. It sounds like multiple hundred units now at this point that you guys have kind of like amassed over time, and you're in the never sell camp, right? You just build to rent and kind of hold as best you can outside of kind of the every so often maybe the opportunistic exit, right? I love that. So you said you have one main partner. What are the roles and responsibilities for the each of you? Like, how does that work?
So I do have one main partner. I have a handful of partnerships, and I think part of what gets me really excited is combining forces, and 1+1 = 3. So finding the skill set of each individual partner, and how we can make a project phenomenal, whatever it is that we're working on. So some of my partners have more property type, or and other ones are more geared towards new construction or whatever. But the main partner that I have, that I operate R+M under, he owns a general contracting company, pretty large one in the city, and they do third party as well as our own developments. And I guess the way that it's split up is we kind of tag team the development part of it. I'm more on the financial side of it, fundraising, analyzing, underwriting, and then on the back end, I do a little bit more of the asset management. And then he's kind of on the construction side of it. But yeah,
Oh, I
and
mean, great separation of roles, right? Like two very different things. That's great.
sure, yeah,
So,
and it's
sorry,
and
go ahead.
sorry, yeah, and even as lean and mean as we are, right now we have probably about 400 units assets under or 400 units under management. We have about 5 or 6, anywhere from 30 to 50 unit projects going on right now, that we're in different stages of the development process in terms of construction or pre-development construction, lease up, or stabilization.
Oh, that's intense. And again, like a 4 man kind of team is running this whole thing. So it's critical you have good vendors and things like that. What's your vetting process? It sounds like you have a great partner that kind of oversees construction, but like, naturally you come across, challenging trades, challenging vendors, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, how do you feel like what's the gold standard to you? What do you look for, when you're out there in the selection process of who to trust to kind of oversee the projects?
Yeah, I mean, the strength of a development process is really about kind of like what I talked about earlier. Along the way, you're using, whether it's a broker to find you deals, the architect to design and really add that value into bringing your vision to life. Lenders are really, really important. Obviously, your contractors are incredibly important, but every step along the way, it's really, really important to have incredible relationships with whatever vendor, whatever contractor, whatever consultant that you're using. And I feel like that's where we found success and failure. And I think in the beginning, it was probably easy to compromise and say, this is somebody I know, they'll probably fit the bill. And now it's really important to vendor, attorney, is this person perfect for us? Because otherwise it doesn't make sense to add them to our team. Um, it there's such a huge difference in my experience between a really good architect, for example, and somebody that's just does something different than maybe what you're expecting. And the quality of the people that you're working with are just going to bring the quality of the end product up and allow you to attract more and more professional contractors, vendors, whatever it is. Because when you put that gold star, that stamp of approval on the project, it's going to attract what it is. If it's a poorly constructed project, you're not going to get the people that are top notch in their industry to want to work with you if you don't compromise and you strive for the best. You're going to get people to work with you.
No, I love that. I mean, it totally resonates too, because I had a very similar uh, kind of experience in the broker world, right? Like for a long time, nobody would take our calls because we were just kind of nobody's trying to buy, when you know this, but we're in self-storage. But once we did a couple of trades and people kind of heard like, oh God, these guys are doers and they're getting deals done, all of a sudden the phone started ringing, it was quite the opposite. So, you got to have time in the market to build a reputation, but also like to your point, like how you treat your trades, the what the partnership looks like when you're going through deals and developments, it all kind of comes together. So that's fantastic and opens up hopefully better partners and better kind of resources for you as you get further along. Um, Failure, let's talk about that for a second. We've all had our punches, like we've taken quite a few, right? And so I certainly have. Tell me a little about a war story. Give me something, that some lessons you learned, kind of what happened, unpack, a deal or that went sideways or something like that.
Man, I feel like I have so many war stories. It's just, and I really I want to think that I learned lessons from each one of them. And I think I did for the most part. There's two that I would say come to mind. Our very first deal, we bought, like I told you earlier, we bought 2 lots and we said, all right, why don't we hire two different general contractors? So for the one lot, we'll hire one, and the other one, we'll hire a different one. So the first project, we hired this one general contractor. He had a pretty good reputation. He built it. It went phenomenal, went flawless. It was perfect. The second one, we hired this guy. I'm not even sure where we got him. We probably got him out of Craigslist or something like that. It was that bad. So we had this general contractor, and we're doing these projects simultaneously. So it's really easy to see this one's behind and this one's on track. And the quality, the timing, everything was just off. So we gave this guy probably 2 or 3 months, and there's just excuse after excuse, and it was failure after failure. And eventually we fired him. So he's fired. There was a framer on the project, and somehow he came back to us and he said, "Hey, look, we're framers, we frame the project, but we're also general contractors." So it was right in front of us and said, "Okay, yeah, let's use you. You're going to be our general contractor." Um,
Oh man.
this is deal number one. So I don't know anything about anything, right? So then I hired this framer. He starts framing, or sorry, he's the general contractor. Obviously, he fails. He fails right away. He does a terrible job.
Oh no.
Um, he doesn't know anything about hiring subs. Not he's not doing it correctly, blah, blah, blah. And we fire him, and we end up just doing the contracting ourselves. But I guess what I learned through all of that, through firing two people, doing ourselves, seeing what somebody good does and seeing what somebody bad does, is kind of what I was talking about earlier. Is the strength of the project really comes down to the people that you have working on it with you. And when you find somebody that is top notch in whatever they're doing, you really want to nurture and expand that relationship the best that you can. I'll tell you like one other really quick one. We bought, so in Philadelphia is a really old city, and there's been gentrification on and off for hundreds of years basically. And what I realized, what I found out later, is what people do, unscrupulous people do, is they go and they target properties, usually land at this point, that hasn't transferred in a period of time. So if there's a piece of land that has nothing on it, hasn't transferred for 6 years, they'll go and somehow convey a fraudulent deed and just basically steal the property. So
Mm.
they
Oh wow.
forge this signature, convey it to themselves, and then they go out and try to sell it. So that happened to us one time. So somebody conveyed a project fraudulently, and then they marketed it. We thought we were getting a great deal. We buy this thing, and a couple months later, luckily before construction started, somebody came back to claim the property, and we're like, "Whoa, we bought this property fair and square." Luckily, we bought title insurance on it, so the losses were at a minimum. But it really emphasized to us how, I think, when you're small, you can play a little fast and loose, but as you grow, you really want to have your I's dotted, your T's crossed. It's a little harder to
Mm.
play in the gray. You just want to do things the right way with the right people. So I think both of those failures, both of those war stories taught me how important it is to do things the right way, have your processes set up, and the things that you're not willing to compromise on set, and then valuing the strength of contractors, consultants, anybody you work with. It's extremely valuable to work with the right people, and really important to identify the wrong people.
Man, it's ironic how parallel our experiences have been, right? I have like versions of the same stuff you've been through. But what's funny is like Texas specifically, everybody always jokes that like the title insurance is totally worth it, but like that is the perfect example of that one in maybe 500 of the instances where that title insurance policy was worth its weight in gold, right? Because it's rare that people have to exercise on it, but it's that one time where something shows up, out of the blue that you can call on it and it covers you. That you're like, okay, this I got to have this on every single deal from now on. No, great stories. So tell me the flip side of it. Let's talk about the best deal in your mind you've done to date. Do you have one specific that you can think of?
I think the project I was telling you about earlier, that larger project that was the catalyst to get us leveled up to the bigger developments. That was one of our best deals. But then another one that was a really great deal, and not just from a financial standpoint, but from just a learning standpoint, I would say. We bought this. It was with I was telling you how I have different partners, and my one partner, it's a mixed use property. It's industrial, commercial, residential, and it was a really ugly property. So we bought it. It was like kind of limping along, operating. There's vacancy and all that. Um, and what we did is we went in and cleaned it up, and it was a couple warehouses, a triplex, a single family. Nobody was living in some of the residential units. So we went in and we cleaned up the whole site. We renovated the single family. We renovated each unit in the triplex. Um, Kind of did the same to the warehouses. When we bought it, I think it was doing the NOI was or the rent roll was maybe 14,000, something like that. So pretty poor performance. We bought it for around 1.5 million, and we put you know a couple $100,000 into the residential units, a couple 100,000 into the commercial, and slowly we got everything rented up to market rent. And when we're done, when we're finished this, which we have one space left to fill, we're projecting it to bring in around $40,000 a month in rent. So we took
Oh,
it from
wow.
14 to 40. Uh, this is a snippet, so it sounds like one of those Instagram stories where everything's just rosy perfect. But so it was a long time and it was a big process. But we pushed the value hugely. We bought it for, like I said, 1.5, put a couple $100,000 into it, and it's probably going to appraise for around 5.5 at this point when we're
Yeah, I
all
was gonna
done.
say.
It's
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, oh, it's phenomenal. It was a great deal. It was interesting to work through. And I think what I learned in that is if you're able to see past there's huge upside for you, um, in whatever kind of deal it is. And that's really where majority of our value comes in. It's not really in some of the minor details. Those are important, but it's the bigger picture. Like what are we doing here? How do we differentiate ourselves from other people? How do we see through the thorns and kind of push through and see what the end result could be? And that's the challenging, that's really difficult to do, because you look at this ugly property or this raw piece of land and you have to say, with that, this is what I can create. And not only the creativity part of it, but on paper, how do you put it all together to make it all work from a expense and from a return standpoint? And when we're able to do that, and when it really clicks, it's pretty amazing, and it's super exciting and exhilarating what you envisioned it to be.
No, I love it. Like, just taking, kind of the ugly duckling, putting the vision on it, making it the beautiful swan, but then executing to get to that point, which is the hardest part, right? Like at the end of the day, like, can I get this thing from A to Z with as few hiccups and as fast as we intend? You know, you mentioned kind of multiple projects and multi-million dollar projects. Let's talk about capital. I mean, I think you mentioned partners. Do you have capital partners along the way? Do y'all raise capital? Do you have like a micro, like, do you syndicate, or is there like a private equity component here? Do you have a fund? Like, explain to me how that all flows.
Yeah, we're pretty strategic in our fundraising. A lot of it is self-capitalized, kind of what I explained to you earlier, how we
Yeah, just
were
rolling the wins.
to continue to roll it. And as you get bigger and bigger, the role gets bigger. And as season the property for 5 and 10 years, there's more and more equity for you to pull to redeploy. But with that said, we do have some friends and family. We have a combination of mezz debt that we bring on, some preferred equity, some true equity. We have a couple of high net worth individuals, a couple family office types. So it's a little selective. We don't go out and syndicate. We don't go out and we don't raise a fund. It's on a deal by deal basis. I like that better for two reasons. One, as an investor, I can explain to you clearly, this is the project that you're investing in. Here's all the details behind it. Here's why it's a good investment. This is exactly what's going to happen. Obviously, we know that from our track record of performing in these projects. So you can feel confident and feel comfortable in the investment that you're making. That's one. And then two, sometimes I feel like a fund can get you trapped. It's money that you've raised that has to be deployed. And I feel like there's
Mm,
an inherent problem with that, in that if you have to get money working to get the returns, are you picking the very best deals, or are you picking
right.
good enough deals just to get the funds working? So I feel like it's counterproductive, I would say, to raise a fund in a lot of instances. When you have huge deal flow and maybe you have some funds that expect lower returns, and you have, clear, strict guidelines on what your fund is investing in, that makes a lot of sense. But for us, I don't want to be, beholden to the fund to say, I have to get it moving. And especially in times like
Mm,
this is really difficult time. And if we had a huge fund raised, I'm not sure how we would approach investing right now, because we don't have a fund. We're able to say, there's so much uncertainty in the market. It's probably best for us to pause or proceed with caution, as opposed to moving full force, because we have these funds that need to be placed somewhere.
dude, I love that. And I mean, I think the discipline you guys have had along the way from starting with two and just kind of multiplying, compounding, 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 right? And now you're 400 plus with like another couple hundred in the pipeline. I mean, you're going to literally, 50% grow your portfolio, it sounds like, in the next couple of years already, not to mention anything that's coming around the corner. But it took kind of that, like, somewhere along the way, you had a long-term vision of, we're going to keep rolling this and keep growing it. Two things I wanted to ask you. One, you know, institutional capital, family offices, kind of that grade, it's not easy, right? To kind of open those doors and, earn the trust of those type of kind of investors. Where do you think kind of that tipping point was where, like, you finally kind of leveled up? Where were they reaching out to you? Were you reaching out to them? Did y'all get kind of a reputation in the market? Like, how did that happen? Because, that's intriguing. There's always, like, the friends and family rounds, even though those are not necessarily quote unquote easier, but they're more accessible, right? To raise capital from friends and family. But once you kind of level up to the big check writers, right? That's a whole different world, right? So walk me through that. I'm very intrigued on how you got there.
Yeah, and you're right. It goes from, raising those low six-digit checks to, in the millions. Things are a lot more serious, right? And there's much tighter scrutiny on underwriting and all that stuff. So, where it's still on a deal by deal basis, right? And we have a couple interesting structures that we've brought on investors doing, without getting too complex or getting too boring. There's two interesting ones that we did. One, so we have, in Philadelphia, there's a decent amount of opportunity zones. And even in pretty good
Mm,
areas, a lot of times people think opportunity zone, and this is probably a whole nother talk that you could have somebody on, because there's so much complexity to OZ
right.
deals. Um, but they're still in decent areas. It's not in really tough and rough and tough areas. There's some good areas, and we have a couple of deals that we've brought people on, and they represent a fund themselves. So it's kind of like they're doing the legwork for the fund. They've come into the development deal, and then um, as our LP investors, and each one of the GPs has an opportunity to invest along the LP if they so choose. But the interesting deal that we structured with them is they came in as LP investors, but they have committed their fund that they represent to buy out the partnership that they're a part of on the back end, prior to it prior to the project getting a CO, so the fund can realize the opportunity zone benefits. So it's a really interesting structure. There's a little complexity in there. I kind of made it simple, but a lot of moving pieces, but everybody along the way sees some benefit for what they're trying to do. So between the OZ fund, our LP investors, us, everybody kind of wins together there.
Love that. Now, did they find you or did you find them?
This
Like, did
this
y'all just cold call these guys and be like, hey, we got this action. Y'all want to jump in, or how does this work?
Yeah, so my director of finance had been working with them on some other deals prior to coming to us a couple years ago, and he brought them over and said, here, this is what these guys are doing. These are some great opportunities. I think, based on some of the stuff that you guys were trying to do, some of the initiatives, I think that there's some great opportunities within our development pipeline that you might want to take a look at. And so we nurtured that relationship, explained to them what we're doing. That was let's see, I think that was the second deal with them, and we're working on a couple more with them as well.
I love that because, it's not only like, great, you had this kind of, contact in your sphere or in your partner's sphere, but it was also like the right time to engage, right? Like you didn't do it too early on a small dinky deal that maybe wasn't exciting for them. You're like, hey, we're building up, we're building up. And they obviously kind of watched you along the way. I love that, right? It's just kind of figuring out when to tap and when to knock on the door and say, hey, like we got the right opportunity for you guys. And you have to kind of know their appetite as well, right? So, let's kind of round this out. Give me the long-term vision. Where are we going? You've obviously got a huge pipeline of deals going on right now, developments happening as we speak. Is there a target for you guys? Is it the sky's the limit? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, if you would have asked me a year and a half ago, I'd have a totally different answer than today. I feel like the Fed has thrown anybody in real estate a curveball for sure. It's tough times, so even just listening to other people talk about it, and it makes you feel better that everybody's kind of going through the same thing. But it's tough times, man. It's you got to pivot, you got to stay nimble, you got to keep an eye out for opportunities. You have to be willing to look at all types of deals potentially. But with that said, our vision is continue down this path. We've been at this over a decade. Lots of singles, lots of doubles, lots of triples. We're not really in the sexy investments. It's so tempting. You look at some of these hospitality, these hotel deals, or downtown core neighborhoods, and it's really exciting. They're the sexy deals, but sometimes those are deals with low returns, or just it doesn't fit our profile. And I think us hitting those down the fairway singles and doubles and just kind of keep going with minimal risk, and just assembling on top of what we have and continuing to assemble it's kind of where we want to go. And as you see, in a decade we've built what we've built, and hopefully in another decade we'll double it. And but we're not overzealous. We don't need to double our portfolio overnight. It's just that slow growth. And I think ultimately that's what real estate is. A lot of times people think, let's get in some development deals and make $1 million of development and just keep doing that over and over and over. But that's not really reality. A lot of times there are people that are doing that, and Uber's successful with it. But we've been very disciplined not to chase the hot markets, not to get into the Uber high-end luxury markets, just kind of in those core plus neighborhoods, hitting the doubles and triples and the safe bets that are, have return profiles that hit our metrics.
I love that. I mean, I think one thing that I can unpack from that is kind of y'all's strategy on the early end kept you building a portfolio that created cash flow that you can live off of, right? Because everybody's got to pay bills and things like that. But it's also taken the pressure off of like, hey, we got to hastily move and we got to hastily do activity. You can kind of patiently identify good, like you said, triples, singles, doubles, but like you're just kind of selectively, snipering versus like just the spray and pray shotgun approach that sometimes we see people take, right? And had you not done kind of what you did on the onset, I don't, it wouldn't be easy to do that, right? Because you'd have the pressure to not only just make income for yourselves and your families, but also like, like, hey, we got to keep the machine growing at a fast pace. I love that. I mean, hindsight's 2020. I don't know if you were thinking about that, when you started this out, but it's incredible that it all kind of came together the way it did. Um, yeah, I mean, no, this has been awesome. Like, Rickey, thank you so much for taking the time with me. Usually what I do is I make sure everybody has, the way to get in touch and all that things. R+M Development Partners is the company, right? So obviously you'll have the site and we can kind of ping people, whether it's, some amazing LPs that might be listening that want to jump in on the action of Rickey's got, or just strategic people that kind of add value to you guys. I encourage everybody to reach out. Thank you so much for taking the time with me today, man. This has been awesome. I can't wait to check in another 2 years and just see like how big it's grown, strategically grown, right? So thanks, man. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, Porter. This was fun, man. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. If anybody wants to reach out, like you said, it's rmdevelopmentpartners.com. My email's on there. It's just Rickey, Rickey at rmdevelopmentpartners.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram. Would love to hear from you guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Rickey. Cheers, brother.
All right. Thanks, Porter.